go into Philadelphia. We would go up to about 12th and Market Streets, where we would get off and walk across the street over to John Wanamaker's. It's a department store. Now, John Wanamaker's didn't really hold an awful lot of interest for a child. There were some very interesting things going on. We would go inside and listen to the choir in the big atrium. And then my grandmother and I would have lunch at Wanamaker's. And then we would slowly, casually stroll down Market Street. We'd go past the Reading Terminal with all the chestnut vendors, literally roasting chestnuts in the streets. A fantastic smell. I can still smell it if I try. And there were the organ grinders on virtually every corner. Curly black hair, big bushy mustaches, dressed kind of like gypsies, with her trained monkeys, in blue and red satin suits, collecting pennies. And we'd stroll down a little bit further, and we'd come to Strawbridge's, and finally to Litt Brothers, again, department stores. And we'd stop and look in the windows, and the windows weren't filled with merchandise. The windows were filled with animated displays. There would be a family of bears, perhaps, and maybe some kids ice skating. And marvelous snowy scenes. There was always the hint of snow in the air, or maybe it was just the hope of snow. The streets were filled with lights and music. And then we'd go into Litt Brothers. I think it was probably the 5th floor. I could be wrong. Maybe it was the 8th. I'm not sure. It doesn't really make a great deal of difference. Had been turned into a winter wonderland. There was a colonial village. Purportedly had been made in Germany by clockmakers. There were bakery stores and dressmaker stores and houses and town halls. And again, animated characters, life-size animated characters, and sounds and music coming from each display. And then there was Santa Claus. Oh, the longest lines you've ever seen of boys and girls and mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers all waiting to see Santa Claus. It seemed like an eternity. You'd have to wait and wait and wait and wait, and finally it was your turn. You'd think after all the boys and girls before you, the poor old man wouldn't have the vaguest idea who you were, all the faces. I mean, how could he keep them straight? But he knew. He knew exactly who you were. He was a strange man. He was somewhat stern, but also filled with love. He would ask tough questions. Did you help your mother around the house this year? Did you make your own bed? You'd tremble. Frankly, you'd lie. Oh, yes, Santa, yes, I do. I help my mother all the time. I always pick up my own clothes. Yes, Santa, that's true, I do. He'd look at you. He knew you were fibbing. But he knew that you were trying to. And then he would ask, what can I bring you for Christmas? And you'd tell him. And he would sit there and scratch his beard. If the list was a little long, he would tell you so. He'd say, well, I'm not sure that I can get everything on the list, but I'll do my best. And you knew he would. And it seemed like he got at least an hour of his time. It was probably just 2 or 3 minutes, but it was enough. It was enough. And he'd lift you down off of his lap and pat you on the head and send you on the way. And oh, what a great day that was. What a fantastic day that was. 22 minutes after 12 noon. That began a lifelong friendship with Santa Claus. I saw him when I was 5, 6, 7, and 8. I didn't go to see him again after I was 8 years old. I became a doubter. So I now that I'm 42, I don't understand people who doubt Santa Claus. Santa Claus is as real can be. I know that because he's never let me down, even though I've let him down a number of times. To this day, I have pictures that I treasure of old little Bobby Lassiter sitting there on Santa's lap in his reindeer sweater. I know he's real because I went to see him. I sat in his lap. I talked with him. I know he's real because I have the photographs to prove it. I know he's real because he used to stop by my house and hang up my stocking. Usually about the second week in December. The first time that ever happened, I was helping my mother upstairs. She was ironing in the bedroom, and she said she heard the phone ring. I didn't hear it. It asked me to stay there in the bedroom, and she went downstairs, and she was only gone for maybe a half a minute at the most, and she came back upstairs and said that she must have been mistaken, that there wasn't anyone on the other end. And she continued ironing, and a few minutes later she said, "Shh, did you hear that?" And I said, "Hear what?" And she said, "The jingle bells." And I said, "No, I didn't." And so she ironed a little bit more, and then she went, "Shh, did you hear that?" And I said, "The jingle bells?" And she said, "Yes, did you hear them?" And I did. I did hear them. It was in the afternoon. There were jingle bells. And she said, "Let's go downstairs and see what all this is about." And we went downstairs, and she went first, and apparently he was just leaving as she turned the corner. I didn't see him, but there was proof that he was there. My stocking was hung. Now, as everybody knows, back then anyway, times do change, but back then Santa Claus hung your stocking. And Santa Claus came by a number of times between Thanksgiving and Christmas to make sure that you were a good boy. Darned if my stocking wasn't there. And my mother said, "Shh, did you hear that?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "The reindeer in the sleigh. He must have parked on the roof, and he's pulling away now. Must be going down to Sharon Pursting's house to hang her stocking." And I listened, and I did hear them. I did hear them. And I've heard them every single year since. What do you mean there is no Santa Claus? There are other proofs that I have, too. Every year we would leave cookies and milk for Santa Claus, and a little note that my mother would help me write. And every Christmas morning, the cookies would be gone, the glass of milk would be empty, and there would be crumbs on the plate. And there was usually a little note scrawled on the bottom of the note that I had left saying, "Thank you, Bobby." Obviously, no one would touch that milk and cookies intended for Santa Claus but Santa Claus. How much more proof do you need? Now, that brings up an interesting point. A lot of people say Santa Claus likes chocolate chip cookies and milk. Well, that's what we used to leave him at my house. And then there are some other people that say, no, Santa Claus likes oatmeal cookies, or Santa Claus likes Oreos. There are even some people that say Santa Claus likes pizza. Well, the fact of the matter is, I don't know for a fact what Santa Claus likes, but I know that he ate my chocolate chip cookies, and I know that he ate some oatmeal cookies down the street, and I know that he has eaten even strange things like pizza. And I suppose what it really boils down to is Santa Claus just likes food. And it doesn't really matter what you leave him. And as for those people who say that he's not real, well, they just don't know what they're talking about. Now, some kids think that maybe Santa Claus doesn't exist because they misunderstand. Some kids think that Santa Claus leaves all of the presents, and that's not true. He doesn't. In fact, sometimes he doesn't even bring any presents. If there are other people to help out. Or sometimes he doesn't bring any presents because you don't deserve any. And sometimes we get confused with so many Santa Clauses, look-alikes. Well, sometimes they're helpers, and sometimes they're just grown-ups, well-intentioned people trying to help out. And it's easy to get confused. Who's the real Santa Claus? Who's is the helper? But I'll tell you this much. When you meet the real one, you'll know it for a fact. Some people say that he lives at the North Pole.